So hello, Biali. Hola, my name is Juele Organista. I am, what am I representing here? Oh, yeah, I'm the founder of Machitia, which is an ed tech company that helps teachers share best practices like lesson plans with each other that are culturally responsive in terms of their pedagogy and also trauma informed. I'm a teacher, that's my background, and I'm super excited to help moderate this session, como la Flor, recognizing toxic work environments. And I don't think we have a sponsor for this session, so we have a little bit more time to talk about me and also our amazing panelist or speaker. I guess there's not a panel, but our speaker. And let me tell you a little bit about what she's representing. Flourish. Flourish is something she's been working on and is super excited to be, launching. And what she's going to be talking about today is going to be connected to La Flor, right? Flourishing. Hopefully, you'll get the idea of what we're trying to talk to about. But it's a free job interview coaching service for software engineers looking to join a company that'll help them thrive. But I'll have her introduce herself, especially going a little bit more in depth about that, and she'll connect it too about how what we're talking about today is connected with that too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joel. So let's get started. So I wanted to get started on a story. So in March of 2016, I experienced burnout for the first time. I was very early on in my career and didn't really know that I was experiencing burnout, didn't have the language really for it, but I was really frustrated, powerless, and feeling very disenfranchised. I was invested in a company that was not invested in me. So one day, I actually didn't know what to do. I knew that things were bad at my job, but for some reason I couldn't get myself to leave, and I was really struggling. So one day I had lunch with my father-in-law around the corner from my job, and I took over the entire lunch and vented about my work experience, and I was on the brink of crying, and he listened to me. And once I was done, he looked at me and he said, "You're like a flower. Flowers need sun, need rich soil, need water in order to grow and shine. What happens when you move a flower or you put a flower in a dumpster? It dies, it withers away." And that was my como la flor moment. I realized that I was a flower, and it was such a transformational moment for me. And it really changed the way that I related to work and working environments. So today we're going to use this como la flor framework to understand and to help us understand how to recognize toxic work environments and how to find ones that will help us thrive. So I'll get started by saying hello, hola. My name is Zainab Ibrahimi. Most of my friends call me Z. My pronouns are she, her. I was born in New York to a Chilean mother and an Iranian father. And despite I was born here in the United States, I grew up in Chile. I've been in the software engineer, I've been in the tech industry as a software engineer for about 10 years. I've managed teams, I've mentored and advocated for young people of color in the industry, and I've also been a teacher, a programming teacher in high schools. Currently, like Jorge said, I'm the founder and CEO of Flourish, which is a free job interview coaching service that helps people find jobs in which they will flourish. And I'm also a software engineering consultant at Tall Poppy, which is a security company that's helping people protect themselves against online harassment. So let's get back to the Como la Flor moment. So like I said, we're like a flower, right? And flowers start off as a little seed, and they start growing little leaves, and then they grow all the way until they start blooming and become this radiant flower that contributes to the ecosystem by helping other flowers grow with their seeds, right? Or contribute to the ecosystem through, bees that come and feed from their pollen, et cetera, et cetera. So we're talking about how we're a flower, right? And how does that translate a little bit to the professional or your career? So let's think about like the seed as the stage in your development, in your career development, where you have maybe basic skills and knowledge, and then you're aiming to grow to the point where you become an expert, right? And you're able to contribute at a level where you're helping others grow by mentoring, by creating new frameworks, by leading. Now, I believe that we're in this world to become a blooming flower. And in order to become a blooming flower, we need these 4 essential things. We need adequate sun, exposure and amount. We need water, right, in its adequate frequency and amount, rich soil with lots of nutrients and good composition. And we also have to be pest-free, right, in order to grow. Now, regardless of which stage in your development you are, you'll need different mixes of these 4 components, right? You might need more sun when you're a little seed, but maybe need a little bit more shade once you're a big flower. And so it's interesting to understand that your needs are going to be different depending on the stage that you're at. Now, I want to define this concept of healthy, because I'm going to talk. And when I say healthy, I mean it's an environment that's conducive to growth. So when you're growing or blooming, the mobility is always upwards, right? Your environment is helping you grow, basically. Now, the opposite side, when I'm talking about a toxic environment, we're talking about an environment that's capable of stopping or slowing your growth. So this could be situations where there's too much sun, too much water, there's pests everywhere, there's an imbalance of nutrients, or too little on the other side, right? Too little sun or water. And what happens is in toxic environments, you can be, again, it affects different stages of your growth in different ways, where you could be underdeveloped, meaning that you haven't grown as much as you should be, or you're stagnating, where you've grown, but you're like stuck, or on the worst case, where you're withering, which is you're burning out, you're done with the industry, you can't stand the tech industry, you're like out, or you're like, your health is, highly compromised. So this is what I call environment. So now let's translate these 4 elements to work, right? So we talked about sun, water, soil, and pest-free. The sun is like getting direction and feedback. The water is fulfilling work, soil, opportunities and trust, and the pest is feeling safe and not needing a mask. And we're going to go into all of them in a second. So direction and feedback. So this is entirely about the manager. You want to get direct and clear feedback from your manager, but it has to be in a way where, and I love this framework in this slide, is from the book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And she talks about how the best kind of feedback is one that you get where the person giving it cares personally, so knows where you're at in life, what you need, right? Knows you personally, but also challenges you directly. So gives you really clear feedback about how you're doing and what you need to do in order to grow. Now, any other combination of that, like not caring personally and giving, direct challenge, or not caring personally and not challenging directly, right? Those are all combinations that are not really great for your growth. Now, fulfilling work. So I talk about fulfilling work as it being flow-like and that you're properly compensated. So when I say flow-like, I mean this concept of a flow that's based on this book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experiences, where it talks about flow is a time or a moment in which you're most creative and most free, and you're just in the flow, right? And in order to get to that flow channel, there's a relationship between the amount of skills and the amount of challenges that you're getting. So they have to be correlated, right? So if you have too many skills and you're not being challenged enough, if you have too many challenges and you don't have the skills, you're going to be highly anxious. So like having that medium is extremely important. And then being properly compensated. So this is extremely important. You need to know how much the average is in the market that you're in. Please making sure that you can pay your bills and live comfortably, obviously. But actually, I think that being properly compensated is something that you can actually feel. But what really, really helps is if your company has salary transparency, so you know what your coworkers are also making for the same amount of work. Now, one thing that I didn't mention early on was that here, fulfilling work also has to do with like the kind of work that you're doing. So if, let's say, you're a developer and you want to develop in React, which is just a technology framework, but you're in your work that you're being asked to do, I don't know, some other language like Go, right? So like it has to be aligned with what your purpose is and what you want to be doing. Okay, so on to opportunities and trust. So opportunities and trust are basically around career growth and promotion. So are you given opportunities and trust to grow? Are they available to you? Do you know how to get them? Do you know for sure that you trust that you will be, able to get a manager role, right? So this is like the soil. And then lastly, talk about safety. So being pest free, right? So when I say not needing a mask, it's based on some concepts that these two books, which I love and highly recommend reading, talk about, which is bringing your whole self to work is extremely important because you're able to try new things, you're open to what you don't know, and you're always looking to learn more. You're always sharing your ideas and reaching out, and you're just much more productive and much more creative in the workspace. And the problem with pests, like microaggressions, discrimination, hostile communication, code switching, and abuse, is that it stifles that, right? It makes you come in with a mask and be always on the defensive. So this is a picture of what a healthy environment looks like, right? You need all these things in balance and the right amount of each, depending on your developmental stage in your career. Now, one thing that we should note in this slide is that all of these things have one key component or one trend, which is that leadership is really in charge of creating the working environment. So I call it the leadership is the groundskeeper. And I know I'm like really going in on the analogies today, but if you think about it, it's true. They're the ones that determine, your direction, the amount of feedback and how often they give you feedback. They determine what kind of work you're doing and how much you're getting paid, right? They're determining your promotions. And also on the safety side, they're determining what the accepted behaviors are. They're the role models on what communication looks like. So leadership is super key. So let's say that after everything that I've just said, you're like, oh my God, I think I'm in a toxic environment. What should I do? How do I change this? And unfortunately, I'm sad to say that my only solution for you is you most likely need to leave. And I'll tell you why. It's extremely hard to change a toxic environment. It's not impossible. And if you have channels to leadership or you have some kind of power, you might be able to change it. But in general, it's very hard because working environments are created by people and changing people is extremely hard. So my recommendation is to look for a working environment that is right for you. And now I'm going to get into like a little bit of a rant because getting a job requires you to go through a job interview. And I feel like there's so many misconceptions about the job interview. Like we're taught that, for example, going into the interview is a place where you're evaluated and you have to convince of your worthiness and your value. We're also told that the interviewee or like the company has all the chips and all the cards and all the questions, and you just have to like come up with some questions just so you look smart. And then ultimately, it's like you want them to just like you. It doesn't matter what company it is, you just want them to like you. And we're like, oh, well, if the company has a good environment or a good culture, it should be enough. But it's not, because, we go back to the Como la Flor framework, right? You're a flower. And like the conditions of your working environment are super key to your growth and happiness. And so my proposal is that when we're going into our job interview, we put on our overalls and we become a gardener. So gardeners, if you think about it, it's like you're pulling out weeds, you're feeling out the soil, you're checking the health of other flowers in the garden. And so because you care about your growth, you got to do your due diligence. You got to figure out what the environment looks like. And so you've got to interview the company as much as they're interviewing you. So prepare your questions and keep an eye open for red flags. So I'm going to help you guys with some tips, or just share some of my tips when it comes to the kinds of questions that you need to be asking. So one thing for sure is canned questions will get you canned answers. So please do not ask any of these. These are just like a sample, right? Like, what are your company values? Or like, why did you join the company? Doing for a couple of years, and I have canned answers to all of these questions, right? Even if I'm like in my worst days or I hate the company that I'm in, right? Like I have to put up a good, face for the company. That's why I'm, interviewing and, whatever. But these will give you really vague answers. Instead, what you want is to ask very personal questions. So for example, if you're talking with a manager, right? You ask about how often they meet with the report, or how many reports do they have, or when did they decide to become a manager, or what's their least favorite thing to do as a manager. And this is super key for you to determine, can I have a relationship with this person? Will this person help me grow, right? Basically, this is just a sample, right? There could be so many other questions to ask, but ask questions that are personal so you can find out what this person is all about. For example, if we're talking about fulfilling work, we could talk about asking if there are other people in my role and how involved they are in the decision-making process, right? Something that people, want to ask is about work-life balance, right? And sometimes we ask, what's the work, like, what are the hours, or what are the policy, right? But instead ask, how long do you normally work until? Or like, what time do you get off from work? Or when was the last time you took vacation? So it gives you an idea of like, exactly what does this person do? Like, and if you're asking personally, they'll have to reflect on their own experience as opposed to saying they can't, oh yeah, we're a 9-to-5, we really care about work-life balance and vacation and blah, blah, blah. But like, if you're asking about them, like when was the last time they took vacation, it changes. When it comes to opportunities and trust, right? Like you can always ask about when someone got promoted, or when did that person, like when did you promote? When was the last time you promoted someone, right? Or has anyone in my role gotten promoted? And so they can share actual stories, and you can kind of gauge, if this is the environment for you. And when it comes to safety, so this one's a tricky one because sometimes people have the tendency of asking about diversity straight up. But I think that there are other ways that we can ask for questions to figure out whether or not there are pests in the company. And these two at the top are one of my favorites. It's asking, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about the company? And it's generally a red flag if the person doesn't have an answer or tries to answer by saying that nothing is wrong, because you want a culture that encourages dissent, that encourages always growing. Like you should know, like no company is perfect, right? Like there's always something that you want to change. So depending on that answer, that gives you a lot of insight. And then describing the team in one word, I have like a really interesting story on this one. One manager was like, we are very studious. Like the team is very studious. And there's nothing wrong with being studious, but the fact that the manager, that was the one word that they had to describe the team was very telling, right? So this is like a super interesting question to ask. And then asking about who are the people on the team, right? Because you kind of want to get a gauge for the diversity or the demographics, but you don't want to ask straight up. But you can ask like, who are the people? What are their names, right? What are their roles? Or like, who's your favorite person on the team? And so it starts creating a map for you of like, what will my team look like? So I hear sometimes people, and myself included, when we get out of an interview and we're like, oh my God, that interview went awful, right? Like you're spent because it sucked. And one question I would like you to reflect on is, did the interviewer create an environment that allowed you to shine. So interviews are really nerve-wracking, and we all know that. And as an interviewer myself, I always try to create an environment where people can feel comfortable, right? So like, let your guard down, just be yourself. And sometimes when we come out of these really awful interview experiences, I've reflected, at times it had to do with the interviewer itself, right? Like that person was either like condescending or disinterested in me, or the questions that they were asking were not relevant to the work that I was an expert in or that I cared about. Another red flag is poor communication, or like the poorly planned, the way that the interview is planned. So these are all like little things that you should keep an eye out for when you're interviewing, when you're planning the interview, right? Because they're going to give you little tidbits on what it looks like to work there, right? Like if the person is condescending on the interview, what makes you think that that person's not going to be condescending at work, right? If that person is not properly prepared for the interview, it maybe means that the company hasn't thought about interviewing in a good way, or like hasn't been thoughtful about it. And potentially, if they're not thoughtful about the interview, the kinds of people that are joining are probably not very diverse, right? So all of these things are like really important to keep in mind when we're going through the interview. So I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, oh, wait, actually, no. So the Como la Flor moment. So we're actually coming to the end of the talk, and I wanted for you guys to take this moment that we just shared together as your Como la Flor moment. So my Como la Flor moment was when my father-in-law talked to me about, and kind of told me and made me realize that I was a flower. I want you guys to remember that you're a flower. You need a healthy environment to grow. You need your sun, water, soil, and you will need to be pest-free in order to grow. And all of that implications into the work environment. Leadership is super influential in how your work environments are created. And also the interview, right? Let's get our overalls and become our gardeners, ask all the right questions that are personal, and watch out for red flags. So yeah, I think this is like super key, and I try to remind myself of this every day, is that you're really worthy and have beautiful things to give to the world. So, okay, this is the part that I got confused with earlier. So I'm sure a lot of you have been wondering, what is this Como la Flor like framework? What does Como la Flor mean? Who is this lady who keeps showing up? So I just wanted to kind of round up all of my analogies by sharing that this is Selena. She was an American singer in the early 90s. She passed away in 1997. And a lot of her songs, I love her. I'm a huge fan. The first cassette tape that I ever had in my life was a compilation of her early songs. And this song, Como la Flor, which means like a flower, is about her being in a relationship and how she was a flower and she received so much love. And then when the person, this man, no longer loved her anymore, she as a flower started to wither. And when she started to wither, she left. So it's like, como la flor con tanto amor, me diste tú, and se marchito, and me marcho hoy. So if you get anything from this talk, let it be this song. Let it be known that Selena had a message for us, which is be like a flower. Make sure that your working environments are ones that are loving, right? Or like, help you grow. And then if it doesn't, leave. And I love this analogy, and I'm using a bunch of analogies because I love also this quote, which is, when we change the way that we look at things, the things that we look at actually change. And so when we expect more of our environment, we're also changing it. And I kind of added this at the end because I really love what Felipe, one of the executive directors at Techqueria, said at the opening remarks, which is, no one is going to fix the tech industry for us but us, right? So when we're empowered to expect more, we're actually changing the spaces around us. And that's it. Thank you. This is me, Zainab Ibrahimi. Lots of ways to connect with me, but yeah.
Thank you, Z. Like, first of all, this was amazing. For the people that are watching, this is being recorded, and there will be a YouTube video, just like with every session, that will be provided later, so people can totally review this. In terms of the slides, you know, I'm sure we will link the slides in so people can see that. We will connect the contact info too, and everyone with everything. But now we're gonna have a conversation, Z and I, and of course we're gonna look at the chat to see if any questions or stuff come up. But still stay with this session, because there's still time. There's still like around 15 minutes left in this session to have a great conversation. So what am I doing here? I kind of felt like one of those like TikToks where I'm like just being the duet, like I'm just watching it right now. Now I get to engage. But I love this. Her and I connected earlier last week, and we have so much in common in the ways we think environments should be, whether it's the workplace, whether it's the communities you're trying to build. And my background is in decolonizing leadership development. I did a TED Talk 2 weeks ago about this, and everything she said, I said, and so she should just give a TED Talk herself. So that's what I think about that. So it's about ecosystems, right? Like growing people. I talk about growing leaders. She's talking about growing yourself in an environment, especially in a workplace. Like the workplace is your environment, right? And the leaders are the people, she said, the gardeners, right? The people that are groundskeepers, that are like keeping and creating that ecosystem or the environment. So everything she mentioned was very, very big. I took a lot of notes, some stuff to highlight. Just real quickly, since you're all part of Techqueria, there is an actual channel. There's so many Slack channels. There's a channel for gardening. So join that one so you can learn more about actual gardening, because we need that in our lives.
What? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so do that. We'll totally join. I think it's called gardening something. But anyways, that's a plug-in for that, because we need to decolonize by actually practicing this, and we can learn from plants when we do this. So please do that. And then the other thing is she mentioned pests. That's really what the toxic, well, there's a lot of the elements, but I want to mention the pests a little bit, just because I also consult on this about how when it comes to diversity inclusions, it's so big when it comes to the pests. There's little TikTok like accounts of people just like talking about how they do all of those, like they code switch, they just can't be authentic, and it's funny to watch those, but it is not funny to live it, you know. And so I think you really understand what those pests are. Microaggressions are real. There's actual video called "Microaggressions Are Like Mosquito Bites," which connects literally to this, which is like mosquito bother you, but like if you get mosquito like 20 or 100 mosquito bites in one day, that's going to be annoying enough. And there are the West Nile virus from mosquito bites are real, where they can kill you. One bite of a mosquito can kill you. There are certain bites, there are certain microaggressions, there are certain discrimination that can kill you, meaning like terminate you, or in terms of the job, or make you just feel like you just are worthless. And that's not a place where you need to go through that. One thing I told, and one thing I want to tell Z, so we can start having dialogue, is the plants. There's certain plants, especially in the Southeast Asia area, where it's a tree, and when certain pests infest and infect the actual tree, they produce something called oud. And oud is the most expensive, like one of the most expensive things in the world. It's kind of referred to sometimes like liquid gold. And that tree can only produce it when it's infected, meaning you will not live in an environment that's always 100% pest free. But when something happens to you, you have the opportunity to create something beautiful. And naturally, plants have the way they react to these pests and environmental harms. And just like that, we also have ways to be resilient in terms of when we are in that. And if it gets to the point where it literally kills you, yeah, get out. But I think Z has not only in her platform a way to help you learn before you need to get out, how you can get in, and what it means for you to go in purposefully, but also once you get out, there is hope, right? There's always a place where you do and can feel like you belong and flourish. So now I'm going to pass it to Z again.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Joel. Like that is so, I was just like nodding the whole way that you were talking because yeah, we were connecting earlier about this topic, and I really love this point that you're bringing up about resilience because you're right. Not every work environment is going to be great, and it's okay. Like if things happen, if you're encountering an environment that's unsafe or unhealthy, right? It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, right? Like you can learn from that, you can grow stronger from that, and yeah, I think that's super important, and I love that analogy that you brought about that tree. So true, so true. I would love to open to questions. If anybody has any questions for either of us, that would be really great to answer some questions. If anybody
Some
has
things
any.
I've been noticing just generally on the stuff is people have experienced a lot of this, especially when you went to the different parts about what an environment, a healthy, flourishing environment requires. Lots of people were like, yes, I want to do that. Or the questions, and they're like, oh, if I knew this, I would have it would have been a lot better for me. So people just throughout your whole conversation, through your whole presentation, were very validating that because of their own experiences. And in terms of, so I don't see any questions still, but feel free to continue to post things. We do have around 10 more minutes. So.
Oh, I think we have one. How valid is loneliness at work, especially when the environment doesn't have people who are like me or even look like me? So that's a good question. Loneliness, I think, has bits of a different part of the 4 elements that I was talking about. So is it that the loneliness is coming from being the only one like you in your role? I mean, it's extremely valid. I think that's definitely a sign that you're not getting something that you need in order to grow. So either you need more direction or feedback from your manager or leadership, or there's something about the environment where you're feeling uncomfortable. So maybe there's some early signs of pests, but they're not overt. So it's not like someone is being aggressive against you, or you're not experiencing like overt discrimination, but you might be feeling some discomfort that's making you feel isolated. So it does sound like perhaps the environment is not great for where you're at and what you need.
One thing I do want to mention in terms of plants is it's okay when there's other type of plants in your garden, because there's the like the corn, the squash, and the beans. Like they all give different nutrients to each other. However, if you're the only plant, you're the only plant trying to grow to one thing, other plants can actually take away your nutrients based on how it is, and it has to be balanced. And so when you are the only person, your identities, especially intersecting, yeah, it is actually not only exhausting, but yeah, you have to figure out and be clear about like, hey, this is how can I be supported? And most companies have some sort of way to support that. But going back to what Z mentioned, as much as possible before you go into a job or a place, do that research, right? Interview them as much as you are being interviewed. That was one of the quotes I liked from Z. One of the things I do want to mention about, I do lead a national civil rights organization called LULAC. It's the oldest and largest Latino civil rights organization. You do have rights also. So it's not only sometimes where things are toxic in some ways, but sometimes there's actual violations of the law. And you should know your rights when it comes to that. Be very aware what the policies are with your work. But yeah, LULAC was suing Texas. Yeah, LULAC is very important in terms of like supporting and defending our rights as a Latinx community. But you need to be aware about your own rights. And there's organizations that, from unions to just general organizations like LULAC, that can help you know your rights, because maybe your right was actually violated and you did not even know. And that's a good indicator of you to totally leave that place, but most importantly, get accountability from that organization if it really got to that point.
Cool. I think there are a couple of other questions we can answer. Do you want to pick one?
Yeah, did you see some? It says, what advice would you give people who have joined an organization that was great at first, but have seen the culture or relationships become toxic over time?
Yeah, that's a great one. So a lot of times, so I'm not a big fan of this idea that a company has a good culture and that this thing is static, because it's not. And a working environment is highly related to the people. People create the environment. And when people, especially in leadership, leave, the working environments change. And so what you're talking about is like spot on, like someone left, right, perhaps in leadership, and the dynamics of the team changed. And so what I would say to you is, do you trust the new leadership to change it? And if not, then, unfortunately, it sounds like perhaps you need to, find another environment for you. Because like I said, it's really hard to change people. And even if it's like, a team member that joined really ruined the culture, it's still leadership's responsibility to deal, right? Because leadership is the one who's defining, what is a role model, is keeping people in check in terms of how they're communicating or their behaviors and stuff. So again, I keep going back to leadership. And if you can't change, you can't influence leadership, then it's really hard to change the environment.
One thing connected to this is seasons. There's seasons in companies or just in a field. There's seasons where there's drought. There's seasons when it's winter. And that could change. So maybe it's a leadership completely where it's not happening or things are right. But it's okay when there's different seasons and things are not growing. Just like you don't yell at the plant in the winter when you're like, why aren't you growing? You should be empathetic enough to yourself when you feel you're not growing. And especially if it's because of the environment. Or maybe you left the environment and now you're looking for another one and you're trying to grow, but yeah, you technically aren't in an environment. So be very empathetic when you're in a different season. Mm-hmm. and it's a season that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, actually talking about seasons that are hard, I'm just looking through some of the questions, and some people are, we're in a pandemic and it's a really hard season, right? It's a hard time and people are feeling a little bit anxious about switching jobs because of the uncertainty of that. And I think, Sara, you're asking about not having the option to leave a company right now. And those are really tough situations, right? Like either financially you're feeling insecure, you don't want to switch, or some things about your current environment you really like. Maybe you have flexible hours, and so you're scared about, looking for another job that doesn't give you that same flexibility. But also there's like a real impediment, which is emotional. Like a lot of times we just don't feel ready to start interviewing or looking for a new job. Like change is hard, right? Everybody, we all experience that struggle. And one thing that I would suggest to all of you is to start very small, right? So putting feelers out, right? Like starting to get your resume ready, submitting them to places, just like starting to look for jobs. Like it doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of thing, but know that, like I said, unfortunately, changing your current environment is going to be really hard. I mean, if you do want, like, if you're invested in the company, you're like, I believe in the mission of this company and I want this company to succeed and I want to give it a try, start with your manager, right? Start with talking with leadership and be like really open about what you think the things that you need, right? Like sometimes managers are like, they don't know what you need until you tell them. So if you think that those conversations can happen and they, actually go somewhere, awesome, but if you've already tried that and that those routes are not working, then yeah, start getting your resume done, slowly, but also having this perspective that, hey, I'm a flower and I'm in the wrong environment actually changes about like a lot how you invest in the company that you're in, right? Because you no longer see it as like, oh, it's me, there's something wrong with me. There are all these expectations and like you're feeling overwhelmed or you're hating your life because you're at this company. But once you have a different perspective, I'm like, no, this is actually this environment and I don't need this environment right now, right? It's either too much, too little, too infested, right? And even just having that perspective will make you change slowly and help you get into the path where you can find a new environment that's right for you. In my experience, especially in the tech industry, there's a lot more demand for jobs. Like there's a lot more demand and there's a lot more openings for jobs than in a lot of other industries. So I would encourage you to start looking around because there are jobs out there. I know it's a really rough time right now, but there's still stuff out there.
So we are at our time, and to just the last call of action I can give is this applies to a lot of elements in our life, not just the workplace, because when I used to be a high school teacher and I taught health for high schoolers, and I talked about healthy relationships. And your job is just relationships there, but whether it's your partner relationships, your family relationships, just your friends relationships, if you are in a toxic environment, in an abusive environment, please get out. There are resources for that. And Techqueria is a place where we're trying to build a healthy, empowering community. And remember, your job is not everything. You can have friends and stuff at your job, but you also need friends and supporting people that are healthy outside your job. So please build community. Build community on Techqueria. Connect with each other here. Build each other. Be authentic. Really support each other. And then from there, we'll be able to build the communities in every single part and elements of our life, not only in our jobs, but in our community in the ways we need support. So that's our last call to action. Let's continue to connect with us. We're on Techqueria, we're on Slack, so you can find our names. We really want to connect with you. I know we will probably continue this conversation later. So thank you, Z, for everything you're doing. You should write a book. You need a TED Talk. You need anybody join the actual platform she will be having. She'll post stuff on Slack about that. So if you are looking for work, use her platform so you can get support. So everybody go to the next session. We're gonna see you over there. Gracias, Z, and thank you everybody for your great comments and support.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joel.
Bye.
Bye.